It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, the day I had dreamed about for so long. My wedding day in Kansas was meant to be a joyful celebration of love, surrounded by family and friends. But instead, it turned into a nightmare that broke my heart and left me questioning everything I believed in. The ceremony itself was beautiful. The music played softly in the background, the flowers were perfectly arranged, and the guests were all smiling. I looked around the room, feeling a rush of excitement and anticipation. Logan and I had spent months planning every detail, and I couldn't wait to start our new life together. Everything seemed perfect until it wasn't. As the evening went on, things began to unravel. It started when Logan's mother, Mrs. Owen, approached me. She was a stern woman in her late 50s with an air of authority that often intimidated everyone around her. With a serious expression on her face, she called my name. "Kendra," she said, her voice cold and filled with disapproval. "I need to speak with you." I followed her to a quieter corner of the venue, hoping it was just a minor issue that could be easily resolved. But as soon as we were alone, her anger spilled out. Her face was red, and her voice was sharp. "You've been incredibly disrespectful today," she said, glaring at me. "You've embarrassed me in front of everyone here." I was stunned. I had been nothing but polite and careful all day. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to stay calm, even though my heart was racing. She didn't give me a chance to explain.
"Don't play innocent," she snapped.
"You think you can join this family and do whatever you like? You're a disgrace." Her words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Just as I was trying to gather myself, Logan walked over. He must have noticed the tension from across the room. He looked at both of us, his face unreadable. "What's going on here?" he asked, his tone sharp and curious. But the way he asked made it seem like he already suspected something. "Kendra has been disrespectful," Mrs. Owen said, raising her voice for others to hear. "She's ruined the day for everyone." I couldn't believe what was happening. Before I could defend myself, Logan turned to me, his expression hard and filled with disappointment. "Is this true?" he demanded, his gaze piercing. "Have you been causing trouble?" "No," I said firmly, though my voice wavered with emotion. "I haven't done anything wrong." But instead of believing me, he looked even angrier. In that moment, I felt completely alone, standing between the man I loved and his mother, who seemed determined to destroy everything we had worked so hard to build. What was supposed to be a day of love and joy had turned into a scene of heartbreak and betrayal. I was just trying to enjoy my wedding, but Logan's eyes turned cold. "You've made a fool of yourself and my mother," he said, his voice loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "This is unacceptable." His words hit me like a punch, but nothing could have prepared me for what happened next. In a shocking moment, Logan raised his hand and slapped me across the face. The sound of the slap echoed through the room, and a wave of humiliation washed over me. My face stung, not just from the physical pain, but from the shame of being hit in front of everyone. The room fell completely silent. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of what to do. No one stepped forward to help. Logan's mother stood there watching, a smug smile on her face, as if she had just won a battle. Then Logan's voice, filled with anger, cut through the silence. "You're a disgrace," he shouted. "You've dishonored my mother. I can't believe I married someone like you." I stood there frozen, stunned by his words. Tears welled up in my eyes, but I couldn't move. The guests around me became a blur of shocked faces. I wanted to run, to disappear from this horrible scene, but my feet felt like they were glued to the ground. Logan's behavior wasn't just hurtful, it was devastating. In front of everyone I knew, in what was supposed to be the happiest moment of my life, my dignity was ripped away. As the guests slowly began murmuring and awkwardly resuming their conversations, I felt the weight of their judgment. The laughter and music from the reception seemed to mock my misery. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I excused myself from the reception and found a quiet corner at the back of the venue, far from prying eyes. Tears streamed down my face as I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I had dreamed of this day as a fairy tale, a celebration of love and happiness. Instead, it had turned into a nightmare. Sitting there alone, I realized something painful but important. The marriage I had hoped would bring me joy and security was already revealing itself to be something toxic and harmful. Logan's actions and his mother's clear satisfaction in my humiliation weren't just a moment of anger. They were signs of a deeper, darker reality that I hadn't fully seen before. As I wiped my tears and looked at my reflection in the dim light, a quiet determination began to grow within me. I couldn't let this moment define me. I couldn't let their cruelty break me. I made a silent promise to myself. I would not stay silent, and I would not remain a victim. No matter how hard it might be, I would fight for my dignity and for the truth. The wedding, once a symbol of a new beginning, had become something else entirely. It was now a turning point in my life. The pain and betrayal I felt were overwhelming, but they sparked something powerful within me, a fire that would drive me to reclaim my life and my future. I knew the journey to take back control of my life and seek justice would be long and difficult, but I was determined to face it head-on. This was only the beginning of my fight, and I refused to let Logan and Mrs. Owen's actions define me. In the weeks after the disastrous wedding, I felt like I was living in a haze. The pain of Logan humiliating me in front of everyone was still fresh. But what hurt even more was realizing that my marriage had been a lie. Despite everything, I knew I couldn't let their cruelty dictate my future. I needed to take charge of my life and find a way to fight back. My first step was to gather proof. I understood that exposing Logan and his mother would require more than just my word. I needed solid evidence of the emotional and financial abuse I had suffered. That's when I decided to hire a private investigator named Kyle Bernier. He was known for being discreet and effective. After reaching out to him, we had a brief meeting and he agreed to take my case. Maxime Bernier was a calm and thoughtful man in his mid-50s with sharp instincts. He listened carefully as I shared the events of my wedding and described the ongoing abuse. "This must be very hard for you," he said gently. "But if you're willing to work with me, we can uncover the truth." I nodded, feeling a spark of hope. "I'll do whatever it takes," I replied. "I just want the truth to come out." With his help, I began recording my conversations with Logan and Mrs. Owen. It wasn't easy. Carrying a small recorder in my purse felt strange and stressful, but I knew it was necessary. I needed undeniable proof of how manipulative and cruel they were. It didn't take long to capture the evidence. One evening, Logan and I had a heated argument during dinner. As I recorded the conversation, I felt a mix of dread and determination. Logan's voice was full of anger. "You're so useless," he spat. "Why can't you ever do anything right?" Trying to stay calm, I replied, "I'm doing my best. Why are you always so critical?" His response was cold and cruel. "Your best isn't good enough. You're a burden on me and my mother, and everyone knows it." Listening to his words later made me realize how deeply their abuse ran. It wasn't just about what happened at the wedding, it was a long-standing pattern of emotional cruelty. With each recording, I pieced together a clearer picture of their behavior, strengthening my resolve to expose them. Meanwhile, Maxime Bernier was investigating their financial dealings. He conducted background checks and looked into their accounts, searching for any signs of wrongdoing. After several weeks, he came back with some troubling discoveries. "I've found some suspicious transactions," Maxime Bernier said, his face serious. "It looks like Logan and Mrs. Owen might be involved in financial fraud." My heart started pounding as he laid out the details. "There are large sums of money being moved between various accounts. It seems they might be embezzling funds from clients." I was stunned. The revelation was shocking, but it also made sense. Logan was a financial advisor, and Mrs. Owen had always been heavily involved in his business. Their abusive behavior wasn't just personal, it was part of something darker. They weren't just controlling and cruel, they were criminals. However, I knew that these financial records alone wouldn't be enough to expose them. The recordings of their emotional abuse were important, but I needed to connect all the pieces together. That's when Elizabeth, my best friend, stepped in to help. Elizabeth was in her early 40s, with a sharp mind and a heart full of loyalty. Throughout this difficult time, she had been my constant source of strength, always there with words of encouragement and support. When I shared the evidence with her, her reaction was a mix of shock and determination. "We have to act on this," she said firmly, flipping through the recordings and financial documents. "This isn't just about you anymore. They're committing serious crimes." Together, Elizabeth and I got to work. We reviewed all the evidence, listening to hours of recordings and highlighting instances of emotional abuse. We then cross-referenced the recordings with the financial documents Maxime Bernier had found. It was exhausting, but it also gave me a sense of power. With every piece of evidence we uncovered, I felt stronger and more determined to see this through. One evening, as we sat surrounded by papers and notes, Elizabeth looked up at me. "Kendra, you've come so far already," she said, her voice full of encouragement. "You've gathered so much evidence. Now it's time to take the next step." I nodded, feeling both nervous and resolute. "I'm ready," I said. "They need to be held accountable for everything they've done." We came up with a bold plan. I decided to organize a public event where I would expose Logan and Mrs. Owen. It was important to me that their deceit and cruelty were revealed in front of an audience, so they couldn't hide from the truth. The idea was terrifying but empowering. This would be the final step in reclaiming my life and bringing justice to light. As we prepared for the event, the weight of what I was about to do pressed on me. The fear was real, but so was my determination. With Maxime Bernier's evidence, Elizabeth's unwavering support, and my own resolve, I felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. This was my chance to stand up, not just for myself, but for anyone who had ever been hurt or silenced. It was time to take my life back. I was ready to face whatever lay ahead. The journey had been long and difficult, but I knew it was leading me to a turning point. This was my chance to stand up for myself and expose the truth. No matter how hard it would be, I was determined to take control of my life and fight for justice. Finally, the day of the event arrived. The air was thick with tension, and I felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. I had planned everything carefully, ensuring that no detail was overlooked. The venue was a grand hall, elegantly decorated to create a sense of sophistication. It stood in stark contrast to the truth I was about to reveal. I had invited family, friends, and members of the media. I wanted as many people as possible to see and hear what I had uncovered. As the guests began to fill the hall, I could feel the buzz of excitement and curiosity in the air. My stomach fluttered with nerves, but I reminded myself of why I was doing this. Logan and Mrs. Owen were among the attendees. They stood confidently by my side, their smiles bright and carefree. They had no idea what was about to happen. The event began with speeches and toasts, creating a festive and cheerful atmosphere. I played my role as the gracious hostess, smiling and chatting with the guests. But inside, I felt like an actor in a drama that was about to reach its climax. I took deep breaths to steady myself as the moment of truth approached. When it was time for my announcement, I walked to the podium. The room fell silent, and every eye turned to me. Logan and Mrs. Owen exchanged curious glances, their smiles still in place, but tinged with unease. I took a moment to gather my thoughts, feeling the weight of what I was about to do. "Thank you all for coming today," I began, my voice steady but full of emotion. This event was meant to celebrate a new beginning. But today, it has become something much more important. The guests looked intrigued, leaning forward in their seats. I continued, "What I'm about to share has been hidden for too long. It's the truth behind the image that Logan and his mother have worked so hard to maintain." I noticed Logan's smile fade, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. Mrs. Owen's expression remained calm, but there was tension in her posture. I took a deep breath, picked up a remote, and pressed a button. The screen behind me came to life, showing audio recordings and financial documents. The first recording began to play, a conversation between Logan and me during one of our arguments. His angry voice filled the room, his harsh words cutting like a knife. The crowd sat in stunned silence as the recording continued, exposing the emotional abuse I had endured. This was just the beginning of the truth I was about to reveal. I saw a mix of shock and sympathy on the faces of the guests as they listened to the recordings. They heard Logan calling me names and belittling me, his harsh words cutting deep. The screen then switched to the financial documents that Maxime Bernier had uncovered. These documents showed large sums of money being moved between accounts, clearly pointing to the fraudulent activities Logan and Mrs. Owen were involved in. The numbers on the screen were staggering, and the evidence was undeniable. As the recordings and documents continued to play, I saw Logan's demeanor change. His face turned pale, and his eyes darted nervously around the room, clearly realizing how serious the situation was. Mrs. Owen, on the other hand, looked furious and embarrassed. Her face was flushed, and she glanced around the room, seemingly searching for a way out as the truth unraveled before everyone. As I stood there, I felt a surge of strength and determination. I addressed the crowd, my voice steady and clear. These recordings and documents are evidence of the abuse and fraud that Logan and his mother have committed. They have not only manipulated and controlled me, but also taken advantage of others. It's time for the truth to come to light. The media representatives in the room were busy scribbling notes and taking pictures, capturing every moment. The atmosphere in the hall shifted dramatically. What had started as a celebration had now become a moment of revelation and outrage. Guests began murmuring to one another, their shock and disbelief evident. Logan finally broke his silence. His voice trembled with a mix of anger and desperation as he shouted, "This is ridiculous. These are just lies and distortions. You're trying to ruin us." But his protests were weak compared to the overwhelming evidence displayed before the crowd. The guests, now fully aware of the situation, began reacting. Some expressed their outrage, their voices rising in disapproval. Others offered me words of support and sympathy, showing me that they stood by my side. The hall buzzed with conversation and emotion. I felt a sense of validation and empowerment as I watched the truth sink in for everyone. Logan and Mrs. Owen, who had once stood so confidently, were now scrambling to maintain their composure. Their carefully crafted image of respectability was completely shattered. As the event drew to a close, Logan and Mrs. Owen attempted to leave quietly, but they couldn't escape the crowd or the media. Cameras followed their every move, and questions were thrown at them from all directions. Their once confident facades had crumbled, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. For me, it was a moment of triumph. This event had not only exposed their lies and cruelty, but also marked a significant step toward reclaiming my life. The truth was finally out, and I felt a sense of freedom and hope for the future. It was a victory, not just in exposing them, but in taking back my own power. I had taken control of my story and fought back against the injustice I had endured. As I looked at the stunned faces around me and the flurry of activity in the room, I felt a mix of relief and determination. The truth was finally out, but I knew my journey was far from over. In the days after the event, everything felt like a whirlwind. The truth about Logan and Mrs. Owen spread quickly, and the fallout was enormous. Media coverage was relentless, and the public reacted with both outrage at their actions and support for me. People began to see me as a symbol of resilience and justice, but I understood that my real fight had just begun. As weeks passed, the media continued to dig into Logan and Mrs. Owen's lives. Their fraudulent activities were scrutinized, and investigations began to unravel the full extent of their financial crimes. The once confident duo now faced legal battles that could strip them of their wealth and reputations. While the spotlight remained on them, I had my own work to do. I needed to make sure the justice I sought was served. With the help of my lawyer, who had been by my side through everything, we prepared a strong case. We carefully organized all the evidence we had collected, the recordings, financial documents, and testimonies, into a solid legal argument. When the trial began, I was nervous but determined. The courtroom was an intimidating place, but I faced it with courage. Taking the stand to testify about the abuse and fraud was one of the hardest things I had ever done. Reliving those painful moments was emotionally draining, but I reminded myself that I was doing this for my future, for my freedom. Logan and Mrs. Owen tried to defend themselves, but their arguments were weak. They attempted to discredit me and dismiss the recordings, but it didn't work. The financial documents clearly showed the extent of their wrongdoing, and the recordings highlighted their emotional cruelty. Their credibility fell apart as the truth was laid bare. The trial reached its peak when the judge announced the verdict. Logan was found guilty of financial fraud and ordered to repay the victims he had stolen from. Mrs. Owen also faced legal consequences, including fines and a damaged reputation. The judge acknowledged the emotional abuse I had suffered and granted me a divorce. As I walked out of the courtroom that day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Justice had been served. The pain and humiliation I had endured were now part of the past. While there was still healing to do, I knew this was a new beginning. I had reclaimed my life, stood up for myself, and shown that no one could silence me. My journey had been difficult, but it had made me stronger, and for the first time in a long while, I felt free. The victory in court brought me relief, but it was bittersweet. Seeing justice served felt good, yet the process had drained me. I was tired but grateful. I had fought a long, hard battle and finally won. Though the emotional wounds would take time to heal, I felt a sense of closure and pride in what I had achieved. With the legal battle behind me, I decided it was time to start a new chapter in my life. I moved to a quiet home outside of Seattle, Washington, far away from the chaos and painful memories of my old life. The peaceful surroundings gave me the fresh start I desperately needed. As I sat on my porch, watching the sun set over the rolling hills, I thought about everything I had been through. The journey had been full of pain and challenges, but it had also been a path to empowerment. I had reclaimed my life and stood up for what was right. The support of my best friend, Elizabeth, and the help of Maxime Bernier had been invaluable. Their unwavering belief in me kept me going when I felt like giving up. The journey from victim to victor had transformed me. I had faced some of the darkest moments of my life and come out stronger. The truth about Logan and Mrs. Owen's abuse and criminal acts had been revealed, and I had taken control of my story. I no longer felt like a victim of their actions. Instead, I felt like someone who had fought back and won. Sitting in the calm of my new home, I felt a sense of peace and satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. The past was behind me, and the future stretched out before me, full of possibilities. My story had become one of resilience, justice, and hope. It showed me and others that even in the hardest times, we can find the strength to stand up and fight back. I thought about how far I had come. I had faced my fears, exposed the truth, and reclaimed my life. The journey wasn't easy, but it had led me to this place of peace and fulfillment. The painful experiences had shaped me, but they no longer defined me. Instead, they became a reminder of my strength and determination. With the past now firmly behind me, I embraced the future with hope and purpose. This new chapter was an opportunity to rebuild and create a life filled with happiness and meaning. I had proven to myself that even in the darkest of times, it's possible to rise above and shine. As I looked out over the peaceful hills, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had fought for justice, found my strength, and reclaimed my life. Now, I was ready to move forward and live fully, leaving the pain of the past behind.